Hey, Sai.
Royal.
This is Sai's office. It's pretty good. It's on Beale Street. It's really beautiful, the view from out here. And he has given this like meeting room for this podcast. So that was also pretty nice. Let's get started. So, hi, Sai. Why don't you tell a bit about yourself, your journey so far? Where did you grow up? What did you do before this?
Sure. Hey, everyone. My name's Sai. I am the CEO of Mercoa. Uh, Prior to Mercoa, I was a payments lead at Bill.com. At Bill, I built an internal version of Mercoa, and I ran a payments line of business, monetizing vendor payouts. And so you're asking sort of where I grew up, where I'm from. I was born and raised in Columbus, Ohio. And as soon as I graduated, I moved out to the Bay Area. I studied economics and was lucky during college that I kind of fell in love with product management. But I think at that time, I didn't realize that that's what the job was called. I just thought it was building products for fun and solving people's problems. And so right out of college, I got a job with Cisco. And at Cisco, I got to do internal product management. So building internal tools and kind of the classic product management, take requirements from users, figure out how to build solutions to solve their problems, and then deliver those in an iterative manner. So I've spent the last 10 years at different companies in Silicon Valley, large companies, small startups, and a variety of different roles. And really, I think for me, most of my career has just been the answer to the question of what skills do I need to build a great company? And so I've tried my best to work at places that embody that kind of great company mentality, whether it's great product, great go-to-market, great brand. I feel like there's always something to learn from all of these amazing players. And so that's what's kind of led me to hold a variety of different roles in a variety of different industries, finally settling in on product management once I figured out what it was.
And what do you think it is? Like, because product management is such a broad field. Sometimes I feel like it's also a bit of strategic thinking. It's also a bit of marketing. It's also lot to do with developers, designers, and there's a aspect of project management to it as well, right?
Yep.
So I think varies a lot, but what's like a core of a product management for you?
So for me, I always looked at product management first as the acronym PM. And so everyone assumes that the P in PM is product. But for me, the P actually stands for problem. So as a PM, you don't have influence over what the developer will build, right? The developers are going to choose the best solution possible. You can ask a designer to make certain designs, but you don't have full control over that. The one thing that product managers control is insight into the problem that we're looking to solve for our users. And the more clear and crystally you can define the problem, the easier it is to align designers to build great solutions, and then align developers to actually ship and deliver those solutions in a way that solves the customer's problem and helps the company sort of unlock their next wave of growth. And so I think all of the other sort of aspects of product management really comes secondarily to being very crystal on what the problem is. Once you have everyone aligned on that, it always feels like the sport kind of takes care of itself, right? Like if all parties understand the problem the customer has, why it's a problem, how they're dealing with it today, then we all end up coming to a very similar solution or conclusion on what the solution should be and how we expect to deliver it.
And like, how did you come into the product management space in the first place? Because like right out of university, I'm sure like there would be different options for you, right?
Yeah.
So how did you decide on product management, or like did you come into it later?
Yeah, it's funny. I came into product management pretty late in my career as like a formal product manager. Really in the sense that so in college, I worked on a lot of side projects, and there it was a bunch of, look, talk to customers, talk to potential developers, figure out if there's a way to ship a solution quickly, iterate on that, understand what people are willing to pay. These are all things that I just did as a student. And, I always loved the idea of entrepreneurship. I took a few entrepreneurship classes in college as well. And so for me, like product management is basically what they teach you in entrepreneurship class, right? Talk to customers
Pretty much.
and then talk to the folks who you want to work with to see how you can solve those problems. And so I think really, I became a formal product manager in 2017 when one of my mentors basically sat me down. He was my boss at the time, and he told me straight to my face when we were talking about my career, he's like, you want to be a product manager. And I was like, I don't really know. He goes, no, you want to be a product manager. Everything we ever talk about is related to the kind of stuff that product managers are doing on a daily basis. And so that's kind of when I like assumed the mantle of PM. But throughout all that time, my co-founder and I had been working on projects and products on the side in our nights and weekends. And so for us, I don't think we ever thought of ourselves as product managers. We always saw ourselves as aspiring founders.
And you started another company before this, right?
Yeah.
What was that about, and like, how did you start?
Yeah, so our last company prior to Mercoa was a customer onboarding platform.
And that was with Sandeep as well.
Yeah, I think
How do you know each other?
we met each other at Cisco.
So
Yeah.
Since like a long time we've worked together in the past.
Yeah, we've worked together now for 11 years.
Okay.
And so I met Sandeep at Cisco. We originally worked together on a hackathon project where we connected a coffee machine to the internet and presented that to a bunch of Cisco VPs. Like at this point, IoT was like the new trend.
Yeah.
And so like every good techie, we're like, okay, this is the trend we're gonna go in on, kind of like AI today.
Yeah.
And I think that experience, it taught us a few things. One was that like we have complementary skills. In that one, both Sandeep and I are very extroverted. Like we both know how to like make a pitch to a customer. We like to talk to people. We like to really understand more about other folks first before we get into what we do. The second thing was that both of us had the exact same motivations for why we were working in tech. So like my entire reason for moving to the Bay Area was because I wanted to be in Silicon Valley. I wanted to work in startups. And I wanted to learn sort of what the secret is to building a great business. And for Sandeep, like he's been coding since he was 11. His mother is an entrepreneur. He like grew up around folks who are always starting new companies. And so I think it's funny, like his sort of the environment he was brought up in, it wasn't a matter of like, will you join a startup or start a startup? It was more of when are you starting your startup? And so we both had that motivation that like, no matter what happens, maybe not today, maybe tomorrow, maybe 10 years from now, we were gonna start something.
Interesting. I also like, I found this pretty interesting, like the cultural differences between people, right?
Yeah.
So I think your parents, they came from outside, right? Like
They came from India.
They came from India, right? And I'm like, you have been born and brought up over here, right? How do you think, like, does that cultural thing play any difference in why you are starting up, or what are your values, and how is it different from, let's say, other people?
Yeah, so it's funny, like I think for most immigrant parents, if their child tells them they're gonna like quit their well-paying like Fortune 500 job and start a company, that kind of goes against everything, every sacrifice that they've made. And my parents, for the longest time, were very unhappy with me whenever I quit my job to start something new. But I think what's unique for me was one, like my dad, when he moved to the States, he got 2 master's degrees and then he worked as a researcher at Bell Labs in the 90s. And he described that as kind of like the Apple of the day, where he was working on like cutting edge telecom research. He worked a lot on like routers and like switches. And so he had a lot of opportunities in the 90s to move here. He had a lot of opportunities to work at companies like Google, and he didn't make the move. And he said that was one of his biggest regrets. And so I think for me, it took a couple of years to get them used to that idea. And now it's one of those things where like for me personally, I look at the sacrifices my parents made and I think about, well, how do you get an ROI on that? You can spend 15 years in like a normal career, and then one day you'll get to some return that like justifies it or makes it up for in some way. But when I think about the environment that they were born and raised in, you couldn't just start a business, right? Like you had to go get a license, or like you had to know someone. It was a different environment. And so I look at the fact that being born here in the States in such a free economy, a lot of flexibility to kind of do what you want is a privilege, right? It's kind of it's a right to be able to start a company, kind of sitting where I'm from. And it's not just something that's like fun to do. It's, an opportunity I think people all over the world would
Yeah.
take in a heartbeat. And I see
Exactly.
that with folks in YC, right? Like yourself, where you and Vedant kind of are like, great, we're gonna start something new and like we're gonna take the risk. And now it's a new environment as well where India is really growing. And instead of going the traditional route of like get a government job or like, go work for like a big MNC, you guys are taking your fate into your own hands for the same kind of reason.
And like, you funny that you mention it, like I also feel quite privileged in that sense, right?
Yeah.
Because let's say in India, not a lot of people have this option of starting up, right?
Yeah.
They have their like monthly requirements, right? So like being getting into some good jobs, getting a bunch of savings, right? That helps so much in
Yeah.
like starting a company, right? Like when you can take like 2 years off and then just build whatever. It's such a huge sort of privilege to have because
Yeah.
like the rest of the country like, and like so many people across the world are like um not in that position.
Yep.
So I think that's pretty nice. And you also mentioned this like a right place or like if you're here,
Yeah.
you're probably going to do something in this
Well, if you
domain, right? Like,
recognize it, right? Like it took me a while to recognize that. And it's
Hmm.
funny, like in college, I interned for an Indian company. I went to India for 3 months and I got to like basically when I went there, the MD of the company couldn't believe that I would come from the US to work in India. He even told me, he's like, most people go the opposite way. They're trying to work in the US. And so he thought I was just like I was just there to be a tourist. And he basically made it his goal that summer. He's like, I'm gonna make you go home. Like you're gonna quit early. And so he would send me to like what he thought were the shittiest places in India. There'd be like, the middle of a village in the middle of nowhere. And like, we were automating public infrastructure like water and electrical utilities. And so that was where the need was, right? Like I remember going to a village where they would only get electricity for like 2 hours a day. They had no idea when that would happen. And so they'd be like, okay, someone has to stay by the water pump all the time. And when the power comes on, they turn it on so we can fill the water tank up. And so got to experience that, got to experience the environment in which people do business in India and see kind of like what my dad went through before coming here. And that was when things switched. And the switch kind of flipped for me. It was like, oh wow, like I'm born in a place where like just going through the motions isn't like a huge monumental task, right?
Yeah.
Like when it rains, the roads don't flood up, for example, right? Or like you're not just like stuck in traffic for 3 hours trying to go less than 5 miles.
Yeah.
Like the environment is better. People are willing to be more like trusting. There's a much more like we have a culture based on trust here, and like what you say you'll do versus they're like, you always have to kind of follow up on whoever said they were gonna do something, because they might do it, they might not. Like it's and so when I came back, for me, I was like, look, I'm very lucky to be born here. I'm very lucky to like have the ability to work here without a visa. And so how do you make the most of that experience? I don't think it's consulting. I think it's probably gonna be with starting my own business.
Interesting. You said about that mentality, right? Like
Yeah.
the following up, like why that happened. So in my previous startup, right? Like even I used to have like this sort of practice that I'll probably give more work
Yeah.
to, let's say, just software engineers, right? Then probably I should. And then that is why I also have to follow up because they're also juggling between like multiple things.
Yeah.
I think like getting that sort of mentality out that you don't need to do more, you need to do more with less.
Yeah.
Like do some things but do them well versus like just try a bunch of 10 things,
Yep.
right? But not do all of them well. I think that's like one of the key differences I feel between like the cultures over here and back in India. And I think that is something we can learn from that
Yeah.
here people would take things more seriously. Let's say a website, right? I think startups here focus a lot more on websites, right? Like that they should be good. Like people who are coming, they should clearly understand what it is about and find it attractive, right? But I think in at least India, I think it's more that you just get something functional out, right?
Yeah.
And then like focus more on other things.
Yeah.
So I think that's a key difference over here. But just coming back to your previous company, we started with that discussion, right? So what was it doing? How did you come to that?
Yeah, so we were a customer onboarding platform. We helped larger, like think, enterprise focused companies onboard their users. And in a way where all like these companies would need to collect a bunch of data from each client before they could provision their instance and onboard the customer.
Give me an example.
So one of our customers, they were a platform for car dealerships called Roadster. And so with Roadster, a car dealership could provide Roadster with all of their inventory, all of their like maintenance packages, how they price them and everything.
Right.
And Roadster would set up an online store for the dealership to be able to sell cars fully online. Like kind of like the Tesla experience of buying a car.
Right.
Roadster enables any car dealership to offer that.
Interesting.
And so when we met Roadster, it would take them on average 2 months to onboard a single dealership. And the entire process was handled through spreadsheets and email. So they'd be collecting, like 5 to 6 CSVs or Excel files with a bunch of different data, all kind of formatted in different ways. And then a implementation manager would have to go and streamline all of the data, plug it into Roadster systems so they could configure an instance for the dealership. And so what we ended up doing is helping them replace all of their spreadsheets with a productized onboarding portal. So when a Roadster customer signed the dotted line, they would receive a branded portal that says, "Welcome to Roadster. We need to collect this information from you to set up your instance." And so now, instead of handing raw CSVs and raw data to an implementation manager, all of the data would go into this portal first, where we could format it and we could get it ready for instant ingestion to configure these instances. And so we cut down Roadster's onboarding times from 2 months to 2 weeks. And we help their team scale total capacity of projects they can do by 3x. And so really our whole value prop there was onboard customers faster, reduce time to live, and help your team take on more projects without needing to hire.
That's pretty interesting. Like,
Yeah.
I think like in general, I'm seeing that a lot of the things that we used to do via informal sort of ways, right? Like we'll send some CSV on mail, even something on WhatsApp and like all that thing. If you replace it with a good sort of software where you don't need to coordinate, that's like so much better. Now there are like most of the accounting tools that you'll use, right? They're so nicer, like the information is there, right? Otherwise you'll call someone, hey, what does this mean? And like why do you even need it and all of that. So I think like that makes a lot of sense. And like how did you come to it and like where did it end? How did it go?
So you're gonna see a trend with all of my ideas where we built an internal version of this tool at the last company I was at. So I was at a company called Magento. We sold to Adobe. And so as part of my job at Magento, we had to revamp our onboarding process. And so we built this kind of productized onboarding experience directly into the product for this reason. It was to make it easier for our onboarding teams to get a customer to live.
Interesting. Yeah. So from what I remember, that used to help companies manage like e-com portals, right?
Yeah.
So e-com companies will come, but like you have to onboard them, take information, get them started.
Yeah, we're gonna need their price books. We'll need all of their like inventory, order management system information, any of the like downstream systems that they need to integrate with. So there's a bunch of configuration that we would need to do. And like you've seen this, doing that in spreadsheets is just a nightmare, right? Like it's a great way to extend out how long it takes for someone to go live with you. Because what are you asking your customer to do? You've helped them through a really nice sales process, right? Where you like held their hand, answered every question. And now you're saying, great, to do this, you have to go do a bunch of work to get started. And so we saw it work very well at Magento. We ended up selling Magento to Adobe for around $2 billion. And that's when I realized that there was potential for this kind of product at other software companies as well. And so I think when we started, we were probably one of 3 of these like onboarding portal companies. Today, there's a ton of them. But I think, one of the lessons learned there are a couple lessons learned from that venture. Number one was pick the budget cost center that you want to sell to before you start your business. And so one lesson we learned the hard way was that we were selling to customer success and implementation teams. their budgets are very low for tooling or for any sort of new initiatives. The folks in this space who have done really well were the ones who positioned their onboarding portal solution as part of the sales process and sold to sales teams who have those bigger budgets. So that was one lesson learned. The second lesson was around go to market. And so we started the company a month before the pandemic shut the world down. And so when I started the company, I had done a bunch of cold email. I had a whole laundry list of leads who were ready to convert. These are like enterprise travel software companies, a lot of like enterprise companies. And as soon as the pandemic happened, the teams that we were gonna sell to all got axed or put on ice, right? Because like at that point, companies didn't know what was gonna happen to their business. And so they stopped investing in everything. And so we like,
The start of the pandemic was such a like weird state
Yeah.
because nobody knew what to do.
exactly, even we didn't know. And so I think the thing that the lesson I learned from there, not even a mistake, it's just a lesson, was that even in those situations, there are opportunities to learn more about your market by just re-architecting your go-to-market motion. Well, product never changed. The thing that should have changed when the pandemic set in was how we were approaching the market. I don't think cold email was the right move. I think we should have done a lot more on helping companies address how their onboarding process needed to evolve now that everyone is remote. And sort of what are the challenges that are gonna come up in customer onboarding
Right.
as a result of your client now sitting in like 10 to 15 different places instead of a single office.
Right.
And focusing our content around that, which we didn't do.
But
But long story short, that company is still around today. We have a handful of larger enterprise customers that use the product on a daily basis. But it's in full maintenance mode. And luckily for us, we bootstrapped it, right? So we didn't raise any money. And so I think what we always tell people, I joke with people that it gives us beer money, right? It makes a little over 100K a year. And so between that, we're able to get like a nice little side income. It helps a little bit with Mercoa as well, where I don't need to focus on eating Mercoa's money in order to keep going, right?
Yeah.
We've got that a little bit of leeway in that way.
Yeah, I think that's pretty helpful.
Yeah,
And I would assume like that would be a great learning experience as well, like apart from the money, of course.
yeah,
And now like how did Mercoa start
yeah.
and how's it going?
Yeah, so the way Mercoa started was really funny. In 2021, I joined a company called Invoice to Go as a payments PM. And so at Invoice to Go, we were launching banking products. We were looking at launching new payment methods like buy now, pay later, and a bunch of like cool financial innovation. 6 months after I joined, we got bought by Bill.com. And so one of my first projects was to figure out how to embed Bill.com into this banking product we launched at Invoice to Go. And so while that basically led me down a rabbit hole where I looked at the Bill.com monolith and started working with like a team of engineers to figure out what are all of the services we wanted to expose so that we could ingest them and have the Invoice to Go UI be there for our end clients to manage their bills, but have all of the processing and payments happen through Bill.com systems. And so throughout that time, I thought this would be maybe a 2-month project, right? Like the engineers kept telling me too, like, oh, it's pretty simple. We can do everything. But very quickly, my 2-month roadmap turned into a 2-year-long timeline with like multiple engineering teams promising me that they were going to externalize one specific service sometime in the future. And at the same time, we had a lot of large companies like Square and Stripe coming to Bill.com asking for this product. And Bill kept turning them away and saying, no, we're not going to do that. This isn't our focus. This isn't our opportunity. And so, I heard that. I looked at sort of the dysfunction of trying to make this product work. And I realized that someone is going to build it. It was not going to be Bill.com. It's not going to be any of these AP platforms. They're all too focused on their direct user and their go-to-market and sort of the momentum they built up in that space. For someone to build this product right, you have to start from scratch without any of that holdover from like previous product initiatives. And so it's funny, on the deadline of the YC application for winter 23, I basically like dragged Sandeep over the coals and said, let's just fill out the YC application. Because at that point, I was already interviewing with other companies as well to build bill pay for them. Like I got a few job offers as well, and like I think the week before we got our YC interview, I got a job offer. And it was like the best offer I've ever received in my life. Like the highest salary, highest income, great company. And I just kept looking at the offer and thinking about this idea. And so I told my wife, I was like, look, I don't think I'm gonna take the offer, but before I say no, I'm gonna write out a plan for what I think I need to do to get this bill pay idea going. And so I wrote the plan, I shared it with Sandeep, shared it with my wife and my mentor, and then rejected that job offer. 3 days later, we got the YC interview. And in the interview, all I did was talk about our plan. I was like, this is how I know people want this. Like I've lived it, right? I've seen these conversations. I know why the incumbents aren't doing it. And I know that like, I think I know who the target audience is for this. And so we got lucky, like we got into YC almost immediately after that, but they told us like the acceptance was dependent on us quitting our jobs immediately. So I quit my job at Bill in October. Sandeep quit Stripe in November of 2022, and we got started immediately.
Nice, nice. I've seen this like pattern a lot that people who have worked in interesting companies on interesting problems, like which they have like faced themselves and tried to solve for it.
Yeah.
Those are the ones which are like far more mature in terms of their approach. Like they sort of know what to build,
Yeah.
sort of know who the customer. I'm sure like there's a lot more to it than it goes, but it's a good starting point.
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying. Nice. And how's it going now? And maybe tell a bit about like what it does.
Yeah. So at Mercoa, we are enabling any vertical SaaS platform to be Bill.com for their users. And so what we mean by that is we give our customers all of the infrastructure they need to give their users a great invoice to pay experience, while also being able to monetize on the payments and build out a vendor network. And so like,
Can you give an example of like why would someone use
yeah, so like a great example is like someone like Shopify, for example, right? Today, Shopify is offering merchants bank accounts. They're offering payments as well. They
Right.
just launched bill pay as well. So now as a merchant, I can use the same account where I'm receiving all my money from my customers. I can spend from that account as well. So if like my vendor sends me a $10,000 invoice, I can upload that into Shopify. They will scan the invoice, they'll pull out all the details, line items, the vendor information, due dates.
Yeah.
And now I can make a payment from my Shopify bank account. And so I could even set it up where like I don't schedule the payment to my vendor until I receive X number of payments from my customers on Shopify. And by doing that, Shopify ensures that the funds that their customers are collecting stay in the Shopify ecosystem and then are used to pay other people that Shopify could turn around and potentially bring onto their platform as well.
Nice.
And so that is like, there's this trend going on with vertical SaaS companies where everyone wants to be the one-stop shop for their customer, meaning you give your customer one place
for everything,
collecting payments, making payments, and with these two pieces, then you can do money management and cash flow modeling as well, and ultimately be that like strategic financer for your customer and really provide the kind of liquidity and incentives they need to operate in their industry.
Interesting. So like any sort of like vertical SaaS software, maybe let's say for hospitals, right?
Yeah.
It would want to go into like the finance side of it, right? And
Yep.
like the payments are sort of a way to get people in,
Yep.
right? Like they'll start using it to make payments, and then over time they'll start holding the money, maybe earn interest on that. Lending, as you mentioned,
Payroll, anything, any like suite of financial services that you usually go to a bank for,
yeah,
then this platform could now be that provider.
that's really interesting. Yeah. You know, like that now that you mention it, so like there are a lot of SaaS companies which are horizontal, like
Yeah.
which don't depend on one particular vertical, right? And usually they would go for some subscription model. And I haven't seen a lot of them enter into the finance side
Yeah.
of things. But you're saying in vertical SaaS, that makes a lot more sense because you're like owning a lot about the customer.
Yep.
And then you can have this opportunity versus I mean, let's say like a HubSpot would not probably
Probably not.
not do this, right?
Yeah, it tends to be vertical SaaS companies that are branding themselves as a financial operating system
Mhm.
or a back office management system, spend and expense management. There's always a finance focused approach to their products. But with that being said, you look like someone like Shopify, they started with e-commerce, right? Set up your store and get
Yeah.
paid. And now they're basically going down the burn down of, okay, I started with payment acceptance. So I'm helping my customers get paid, but that money is going to a different bank account.
Yeah.
So what do I do to like get them to hold that money on my platform? I'll offer them bank accounts. Then like now I can offer them credit cards. Now I can offer them payroll. I can offer them loans to help them grow their business. I can give them all of the spend and expense management stuff too. And so slowly as a merchant,
Trying to like get more and more. I've heard this like interesting thing. There were like a lot of these Shopify checkout companies,
Yeah.
right? Like would customize it for a country for type of customer. But then I think they changed some of their terms and conditions, right?
yeah,
And now they don't allow it anymore because they want to promote their own. So yeah, I mean, real platform risk. But they do want like I understand why Shopify would want to like get more and more out
Yep.
of its ecosystem.
so we work with a lot of platforms that are doing something similar type of strategy, but in like real estate or construction, field services, food and beverage, right? You are offering restaurants a expense management solution, so they can upload all of their receipts and you can help them detect trends in their receipts. Now you want to help them also like pay those invoices through you, so you could leverage Mercoa. And now your customers also have one place to upload all their invoices, pay them, and manage the expenses.
Got it. Got it. Interesting. And how does it work? Like, let's say a company decides to purchase
Yeah.
Makwa. What are the next steps? What does the integration look like? And
Yeah, so I think I always start with sort of the vanilla path of implementing Mercoa. So at its core, Mercoa is a combination of a library of React components, which basically give your users that front end AP workflow experience, coupled with our API for all of the processing and heavy lifting around both getting the invoice details and making the payment. So if a customer is going forward with that, basically they embed the React components into their product, set up the authentication so that we can authenticate the user session, test the end-to-end experience with ideally real money, and then after that, go live with their customers.
got it.
Likewise, there are some folks who want to just use our API. They want to own that full user experience and they build the front end out. So in that case, they build the front end, connect that to our API, run a test transaction, and then launch to their users.
Got it. Got it. And so one interesting thing which I wanted to talk about is like the developer experience
Yeah.
part of it, right? So I noticed in last few years there are a lot of SaaS companies which are focusing a lot on developer experience.
Yeah.
I think like started with Stripe, I guess, like very popular. Then there are like Mixpanel has a pretty good SDK, right? Like
Amplitude is another good
Amplitude,
one, yeah.
right? So I think there are a lot of companies who are focusing a lot more on that, right? And like from a business point of view, it's also added cost that you need to bear. So what is the benefit of, do you see, like where do you think do they influence purchase decision, integration? Why, basically why are you doing it?
Yeah, so I think the way that we look at the developer experience and importance is this comes back to kind of core tenet of product management, right? Which is empathy for your users. So I was a former PM, and normally the decision makers I'm selling to are also product leaders. And one thing I realized is that product decisions aren't made in a silo. Like as a PM, you can make a decision, but you usually don't have enough influence to kind of roll that out. And so usually you're looking for
more buy-in,
confirmation from the rest of the group. And what we've learned over the last year is that while the PM may be the champion, they are going to lean on the engineering leaders to actually understand if a product meets their needs or not. And so in the early days for us, what that meant was we would talk to a PM champion, they would bring their engineering lead in, an engineering lead would look at our docs and they would just have a variety of questions, right? Like, oh, how does XYZ thing work? And I think what we realized early on was if the engineering lead doesn't feel comfortable at first impression with what we're doing, it's very hard for us to be able to get out of that ditch. Just because like, as product people, we're used to making promises that we may not always be able to deliver on.
Yeah.
And we also like, we've just subscribed to this idea of that, like, yes, you make a promise, I know you'll do it one day, and maybe it'll be a bit of a bumpy road, but
Yeah.
we'll figure it out. Versus the engineering leader is where the buck stops, right? Like engineers tend to know that in every sales pitch, someone is saying something that's not fully true, right? Or they've been burned in the past by like, oh, is this ready? It'll be ready soon, right?
Yeah.
They infer that as like not ready at all, and we're just gonna throw a bunch of hacks at you. And so I think what we found is that if we can make the developer experience as seamless as possible, we drive confidence in that technical leader that we do actually know what we're talking about. We are the kind of infrastructure provider that they would want to partner with. And we kind of do it in a way where they know they can just run without needing to wait on us to like give them a guide or give them some sort of documentation, right? It's all kind of self-serve and done for you.
Right.
And I think like, it's honestly, it's taken us a long time to kind of get to where we're at now. Like, I don't think our docs are really bad, but in December, we kind of got a big like metaphorical punch in the face where a CTO at a prospect basically told us our docs were trash. And so we lost the deal because of that. And I think, to their point, in their credit, like it was probably the right move given the time and sort of where the product was. And it definitely helped us kind of take a step back and realize that we need to do more to like build that confidence with the developers.
Yeah.
If we want to see any momentum on the product at all.
Like ours is a developer focused
Yeah.
sort of company, right? So what I've noticed is that the bar of products has grown so much.
Yeah.
Right. You have so many like good things to choose from, right? Compared to like few years back. That as a developer, even I wouldn't go to, let's say, try a product which is not well maintained as a
Yeah.
website. If it's open source, is it active, right? Is the onboarding good, really good, right? Then it'll increase my trust.
Yeah.
Otherwise, why would I even use it? There are like so many other options out there.
Yep.
Interesting. And so how has it manifested for you? Like in terms of documentation is of course one important thing.
Yeah.
What apart from that?
So obviously documentation is one, guides is another one, like documentation is like, here's how the API works, here's core concepts. But then we will actually now build custom guides for every customer to say, based on your requirements, here is everything step by step that that you will need to do. And like, we trust that you probably have all these details already, but we wanted to give it to you as a checklist just to make your life easier. Right. Then the third piece there is bringing the developer into the conversation as part of the sales cycle. And as soon as possible, getting into the room with them and saying, look, like, get comfortable with the experience, right? Like we are a developer first product, so there is not a learning curve, but you just need to get used to our concepts and how we work. And so it's better for us to get that done in the sales process before a decision is made. Versus you make the decision and then you like give an engineer this, right? Like they have other priorities, they have other things to work on. This will always be last because it feels like they're being forced to do it versus feeling like they've been brought in as part of the conversation.
I've seen like so many SaaS companies. We got pitched at like my previous startup, and we are also doing that, right? And the priority thing is like so real. Like there will be so many SaaS softwares which are paid for, but not integrated for like 2 quarters. Right? Even at smaller companies, because there's always something to do. So you have to make it like lesser and lesser for them. Interesting.
The other thing we've kind of picked up is that developers, when they look at infrastructure, the infrastructure that they like to work with is ones where they feel like they have an opportunity to learn something new.
Exactly. Yeah.
And so that is something we're really trying to figure out is, look, like we're AP, we're like very focused financial service, but what sort of experience or new learnings can we unlock for a developer that's gonna help them in their career? And I think in our case, it's, you know, rapid iteration and prototyping of a financial service that usually will take other companies anywhere from 6 months to 6 to 9 months. You can get done with Mercoa in like a few weeks, right? And so helping people really start to stand out as like specialized fintech engineers, I think there's an opportunity for us there. And yeah, like really just making sure that we're always trying to aim for the curiosity angle versus the, oh my God, I'm forced to do this angle.
Interesting. Like we have also seen this that developers in general like to learn technologies but not tools,
Yeah,
right? So you want to project yourself as a technology that if you learn, it will be better for you, right?
Yep.
And be able to communicate that well. Versus yet another thing that you have to like custom learn,
Yeah.
and it will not be useful for them in the long run anyway. And it's not like somebody's really pushing for it. So then it makes a lot of sense.
yeah.
And what's like the next for Makwa? How do you see the next 6 months, 1 year?
Yeah, so I would say all of 2023 was really us building product. We had like a small handful of design partners who have helped us sort of inform the core set of features. 2024 is all about go-to-market and starting to take what's worked for a small handful of customers and taking it to the market at large and seeing if we can recreate the results.
And what's the strategy like for GTM?
Our go-to-market strategy is all content-based. And so I think overcorrecting from my last startup, another interesting learning I have just being a PM is that my customers don't want to be cold sold embedded financial services.
I think it's happening like in general.
Yeah.
Right? Like you hear from almost everyone that emails are not working,
Yeah.
right? For most newer companies at least.
Yeah, but also like product and engineering folks are they're smart, right? And
Yeah, they're even more like on that.
they're even more guarded. It's funny, like so I was talking to one of my audience members, and they even mentioned to me, they're like, look, small things too, like your company blog. If you're putting like, you might put valuable information on your blog, but when I go to a branded blog and I'm reading that, I'm always guarded.
Yeah.
Like, what are you gonna ask me for? Do I need to give you my email address? Are you trying to sell me something?
Yeah.
And so like taking that into account, what we have found is our approach is to build and ship value add content that helps product leaders think through the opportunity and do it in a way where they're able to get all of the information they need to like justify the investment before they talk to us. And do it in a way where we hopefully are helping them keep their guard down. So for example, like all of our guides that I launch, they're all on branded Google Docs. I'm not even hosting it on a blog at this point because it feels more like a manual than a blog post.
Yeah.
All of our content is usually around how to even assess this opportunity internally. What are the types of things you should be asking your engineering leads? What should be asking your customers? How should you be thinking about pricing this? How do you know this is the right time? And it's worked out pretty well. Like normally when people are coming to speak to us, they've done all those exercises. And so this isn't something where they're just kicking the tires and being like, oh, like, what do you do? Let me see a demo.
Yeah.
We have folks coming in with very clear goals and intentions, right? Like I have this many customers that I want to roll this out to. This is the unique sort of insight I bring to the table and want to leverage alongside your product. And this is sort of my timeline for doing that. So all primarily driven inbound by content.
Interesting. Like, for us, very similar experience.
Yeah.
We do a lot of blogs,
Mhm.
right? And we host the blogs at two places. One is our own company branded blog.
Yeah.
And then second one is like Dev2, which is a blogging platform for developers. I think the one on Dev2 just feels more educative in general, even though
Yeah.
it's the same content, because your guard is like up,
Mhm.
right? Like you sort of know that there'll be a CTA.
Yeah.
They'll take you somewhere and make you do something. I think that's a pretty good point and interesting. Great. So, and in terms of like your team, you and Sandeep have been together for like a long time now, I think,
Yeah.
right? have you had any like ups and downs while Makoa? Were there any like trigger points?
Oh, yeah,
How has it worked out?
absolutely. I think I was joking with someone the other day that, like, I'm sure you and Vedant have gone through this as well, but like,
Tons, like
founder life is basically two Google searches. It's like a spectrum of two Google searches. The first search is, how do I file for bankruptcy? And then the second search is usually, how much tax do I have to pay if I'm a billionaire in California? And there's no in between, right? And so I think, look, when we started Mercoa, kind of naively, we had a lot of assumptions on how things would work, right? Like, when you start something fresh, you come in kind of guns blazing, right?
Yeah.
Like, this is who we're gonna talk to, and like, after we
You're
talk
very
to this,
optimistic.
yeah, you just don't know. You don't know what you don't know at that point.
Exactly.
And so we came out pretty strong, and we saw good traction during YC as well, like customers, platforms that are expressing interest in this, a lot of inbound demand. I think throughout this journey so far, the biggest downs have just been like learning some of our product decisions weren't the best. So like, for example, when we first started, we had an iframe solution, right? Our embedded component was an iframe.
Yeah.
No React components, no nice API. It was just
Yeah, but
plug and
doesn't
play.
like work really smoothly.
Yeah. So your reaction was the reaction every customer gave us.
Yeah.
But we still found a few folks who said, yeah, I'll do it, right? I'll use the iframe. And that at least gave us conviction that, look, the product may not be great, but someone is desperate
There's a
enough
real
to use
problem.
it, yeah. And as we started working with those customers, they started giving us all of the feedback on how to make it better. And I think over the last year, we've evolved from a very rudimentary and kind of crappy iframe to really robust API, a suite of SDKs, a really nice React component library, really good developer documentation. But it's just been a lot of like up and down, and
What's like the lowest point you can remember?
okay, the lowest point for us was probably in October or November of 2023, where like we have customers who have signed, they're taking too long to get implemented, right? We're now like 6 months into implementation cycles with folks who like were dragging us to work with them. And just this, like, there was no payment volume, very few transactions going through. And so like, I remember Sandeep and I, like, we were constantly like having this existential crisis of like, do we do it? Do we not? Do we pivot? Do we not? And I think like, that was probably the lowest, was thinking that we might have to pivot. Now the highs, this year has been there's been a lot more highs where like the last 3 months have been record payment volumes every month. And like, we're now starting to see a little bit of word of mouth as well from our customers referring other customers to us, and gaining a little bit of notoriety in the market for what we do. And so I think the highs just keep getting higher. The lows are still there, but it's getting a little bit better, where I now know that there is a point of no return that we'll never go back to. And so, yeah, I'd say that was the lowest for this venture. The lowest for Sandeep and I over the last 11 years was probably our first startup in 2014. So we started something, we were 23, 24, zero experience. It was like, somebody just coined the term as like post-college, but prematurity. We were definitely prematurity there, but the startup didn't go anywhere. We had a huge falling out where like, we had like, very passive aggressive email threads, and we like were very nasty to each other on the phone. And like for a solid month, we just didn't talk to each other. And I think, what was funny is that like we both called each other and apologized at the same time. And so I think that was probably the lowest for us as a team, was that moment. Nothing's ever been that bad since.
For me and Vedant, it's like sometimes you are so convinced that this makes so much sense.
Yeah.
It has to be like this. And then like couple of days later, like, will it really work? And then the next day, same thing again.
And both of you are on opposite sides of that.
Sometimes, yeah, and that's worse.
Yeah.
Because then one guy is trying to like cheer up the other one, and was trying to just drag him down with him.
Yeah, we definitely have those days too. I think I'm becoming more mindful of it though now, where at least like if I recognize that maybe it's just one of those days where like everything seems bad from Sandeep's perspective, then like I will make an effort to just be positive and like,
Yeah.
you know, one person has to kind of be stable.
Hmm.
And I think vice versa as well. Like there are other days where I'm super anxious.
I think it depends on your like experiences, right? Like
Yeah.
for example, when I talk to more customers and they're really excited about it and they have some problem, right?
Yeah,
Then I'll be more happier.
yeah,
And Vedant on the other side, like if some implementation is not working well and he has been trying a lot, so then he'll have like lows. So
yeah.
like it's different reasons for highs and lows. I think that's why it's like at different times.
Exactly, exactly. But as long as you're both mindful of like and aware of your emotional state, your co-founder's emotional state at that time, and if you have the emotional bandwidth to adjust a little bit for balance, it works out great. There are definitely some times though where both of us are just like battery low and like, you know, we end up in like the old grouchy couple phase where you're both just kind of short with each other. But then we come back the next day and it's fine.
So like one last question.
Yeah.
How's your so you're also married, right?
Yeah.
So how does that work out, like work and balance and
Yeah.
that thing?
I think what I always tell people now is like Monday through Friday, I'm working on my startup. Saturday and Sunday, I'm working on my marriage. And you know, we were pretty, Sandeep and I, we both got married to our wives 3 to 6 months before YC. And so like I know a lot of other teams and early stage teams will work like 6 or 7 days a week, right? And they'll work weekends. And I think we kind of found that, you know, you could either like the math is basically like you can work 7 days a week and be a billionaire, but you might be divorced, or you work very focused 5 days a week and you still become a billionaire and you're married, right? And so like I think we've obviously it's a little bit harder because there's less time, but I think it's also forced us to focus, right? And
Yeah.
like we're not just gonna do everything for everyone. It's kind of counterintuitive, right? Like something I've had to learn is we don't want to win every customer we talk to, right? Just because someone has the need doesn't
Yeah.
mean that they meet
You are the right or they are the right fit for you.
exactly. But yeah, I think that's really it, is just being very mindful of that.
Yeah, I mean, I think like I became a dad recently,
Yeah.
right? So that the same thing like has magnified it a, like a bit more. Like
Yeah.
I have to be more focused. I have to be more mindful of not doing too many random things, like focusing on let's say two things. Right?
Yeah.
That's been, and I think like that has its own benefits. Like earlier, I don't think I would think stop and think about the big picture, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes you just keep on just executing and not sometimes thinking whether this is the correct thing to do or not in the first place, right? So I think that way it has been like helpful, but of course like
It's you know what they say, right? Like strategy is what you choose to not do.
yeah.
And having these constraints, like whether it's, you know, like married with children or just married, it really forces you to focus on the strategy because your time is finite.
Exactly.
And you like, it's like, yes, you could work on the weekends, but you don't see your child, right? Or like you're missing out on like major development milestones, and what do you prioritize?
Awesome. So great conversation, Sai.
Thank you.
And great having you.
Yeah, thank you for having me.